A house can stand empty for years and still remember the hands that built it. Boards hold more than nails. They hold the hope a man was too proud to speak aloud. Out on the Nebraska prairie, where the wind had room to carry every sorrow, folks learned that a home was not made by square corners or a good roof alone. Sometimes it came walking up a depot platform hungry, ashamed, and holding tight to 5 small hands. Boonvale was standing at the North Platte Depot with his hat gripped in both hands when the eastbound train gave a dying hiss and settled beside the platform. Dust blew in thin brown veils under the wheels. His new boots, bought for the occasion, though he told no one, were already powdered white at the toes. In his coat pocket lay the brass key to the house he had built before sending for a bride, tied with a strip of blue ribbon because his mother had once told him a new door ought to open. With a bit of color, he had expected one woman. The first child stepped down before she did. The boy was maybe 12, all elbows and watchful eyes, carrying a wooden crate as if it were a treasure chest. Behind him came a girl with 2 braids, a smaller boy whose cheeks were hollow, a little mite in a gray shawl clutching a rag doll with no face, and last of all a toddler asleep against Marion Colton's shoulder, his mouth cracked dry from thirst. Marion stood on the train step with her gloved hand braced against the rail, her brown traveling dress dust-stiff at the hem, her bonnet crooked from 3 days of little sleep. She looked across the platform and found Boone at once, though they had never met. Maybe she knew him by the way he did not smile. Maybe he knew her by the letter folded soft in his pocket, the one signed with a careful hand. "Mr. Vale," she said. Boone's throat worked once before sound came. "Mrs. Colton, Marion," she corrected, not with pride but because she had so little left that her name mattered. The toddler stirred and gave a thin whimper. The girl with braids looked at Boone's hands, then at the depot water pump, then quickly away as if wanting water was something shameful. "Before this memory walks any farther, tell me where you are listening from tonight. If this story finds a tender place in you, like it, share it, and subscribe so another weary heart can find the porch light too." Now let us go back to Boone, Marion, and the 5 hungry children waiting in the dust. Boone saw the children the way a man sees a storm cloud over hay he has not yet cut. Not hateful, not even angry at first, just measuring the damage. He had a house with a kitchen stove, 2 bedrooms, a loft unfinished, and 1 good table he had built from cottonwood plank. He had flour enough for a month if a man ate careful, beans enough for winter, and a smoked ham hanging in the cool shed. He had not counted on 5 mouths with cracked lips and train soot under their eyes. The station agent, Mr. Pruitt, leaned in the doorway of the freight office with his Tums in his suspenders, pretending not to listen. 2 women from town, carrying hatboxes and Sunday curiosity, slowed as they passed. Boone felt their eyes settle on Marion like burrs. He took 1 step forward and lifted the sleeping toddler from her arms without asking. The child was hot, too hot. Marion's face changed then. It was the first crack in it. "He has been fevered since Ogallala," she said. "I had no money left for a doctor there." Boone looked down at the child's damp curls. "Name Samuel." The older boy moved closer. "I can carry him." Boone glanced at him. The boy's jaw was set, but his hands were shaking from the weight of that crate. "You carried enough." A flush rose on the boy's thin neck. "I carried what was mine." "What's your name?" "Ezra." Boone nodded once. "Ezra, take that crate to my wagon. Careful with it." "Ruth, Caleb." Marion's eyes flicked up, surprised he had remembered from her letter, though she had only named 2 nieces and a nephew then, not 5 children standing real on a hot platform. Boone had read the letter until the ink nearly wore thin. "You 2 help the little one." The child in the gray shawl hid behind Marion's skirt. "That is Nettie," Marion said softly. "She does not speak much around strangers." Boone looked at Nettie's rag doll, the blank place where a face ought to have been stitched. My wagon don't mind quiet people. For one breath, Marion seemed ready to thank him. Then the depot door creaked, and Mrs. Lila Pruitt's voice came, bright as a knife. "Well, Mr. Vale, you ordered a bride and got a whole poorhouse." Boone turned his head. The platform went still, except for the ticking engine. Marion lowered her eyes, not from weakness, but from practice. Ezra took one step between the town woman and his siblings. Ruth's hand went to the pocket of her apron, where Boone saw the hard outline of something hidden. "Bread my bay, stolen or saved. Hunger me children old." Boone shifted Samuel higher against his shoulder. "Mrs. Pruitt," he said, "you best be careful naming what belongs to me before I do." Her mouth opened, then closed. Boone walked to the wagon. No one spoke again until the depot was behind them, and the horses were pulling along the rutted road west of town. The land rolled out pale and wide, a quilt of late summer grass, gone brittle at the tips. The sky was enormous. A hawk turned slow above a fence line. Marion sat beside Boone on the wagon bench, her hands folded tight in her lap. The children rode in the back among two trunks, the wooden crate, and a sack that looked almost empty. The little boy Caleb stared at Boone's horses with wide, hungry eyes. "Do they eat oats every day?" Boone glanced back. "Most days," Caleb swallowed. "Even when they don't work?" Ruth elbowed him lightly. "Hush." Boone clicked his tongue to the team. "Working or not, a creature needs feet." Caleb sat with that, his lips parted, as though Boone had said something extravagant. Marion's profile remained still beneath the bonnet. She had a small bruise along one wrist where a sleeve could not quite hide it, yellowing at the edge. Boone noticed and looked away. Some things a man had no right to ask on a first road. "I should have written again," she said at last. "You should have written true." The words came out flat, not loud, not cruel. Still Marion flinched. Ezra heard it and stiffened in the wagon bed. Boone kept his eyes on the horses. "I wrote what I knew then," Marion said. "My sister had 3 children when I answered your notice. By the time your reply found me, she had died, and her husband had taken ill and gone too. Samuel and Nettie came from his brother's place after that. There was no one else. There's always a county home." Her hands tightened until the knuckles showed pale through worn gloves. Yes, the single word carried a whole room of iron beds and separated names. Boone felt it and hated that he had made her say it. The house appeared after another mile, set on a rise above a cottonwood draw. Boone had built it square and plain, with a porch running along, the front and a stone chimney at one end. Fresh whitewash caught the sunlight. The roof was new cedar shake. A windmill turned behind it, slow and complaining. There was a barn beyond, good fencing on 3 sides, a garden plot marked but empty, and one young elm tree staked near the porch like a promise that had not yet dared grow. Ruth sat up. "Is that a church?" Caleb whispered. "It's too clean." Nettie looked at the porch and pressed her faceless doll to her mouth. Boone did not look at Marion when he said, "That's the house." "The one you built," she said. "For a wife." The wagon wheels crunched over gravel. Marion seemed to shrink and straighten at the same time. "I will not hold you to the marriage, Mr. Vale. If you can take us as far as town again tomorrow, I will find work. I can sew, cook, keep accounts, tend a sick room, make soap, dry apples, mend harness if I must. We will not force ourselves under your roof." Boone stopped the team before the porch. Samuel coughed against his shoulder, a dry, scraping sound that ended in a weak cry. The house stood waiting, every window dark with emptiness. Boone climbed down with the child in his arms. "You'll come inside before you decide to be noble." Marion looked at him then, truly looked. There were green flecks in her tired brown eyes, like prairie grass after rain. "I am not being noble, no," Boone said. "You're being hungry. That settled it more than kindness would have." Inside, the house smelled of pine boards, cold ashes, and unused rooms. The kitchen was at the back, wide enough for a table, with a black iron stove polished, bright, and a row of tin cups, hanging from pegs. Boone had put a blue rag rug by the sink because his mother had made it before she died, and he had placed it there without knowing why. There was a basin, a pump handle, a shelf for dishes, and 6 chairs. 6. Marion saw the chairs. Boone saw her count. 5 children, 1 woman, 1 man, 7 souls. I can stand, Ezra said quickly. Boone set Samuel on the settle near the stove. No one stands for supper in my house unless he's serving it. It isn't our supper, Ezra muttered. Boone turned, and the boy lifted his chin, ready for a blow or a command. It is if I put it on the table. The boy's face struggled against wanting to believe him. Marion untied her bonnet with stiff fingers. I use your stove. You know how. She looked around the clean kitchen, at the untouched flour bin, the swept hearth, the neatness of a man who had prepared for a life he could not imagine. Mr. Vale, I have cooked on stoves with broken lids, over camped coals in rain, in boarding-house kitchens where the cook drank the cream, and once in a freight shed with a shovel for a pan. I can manage your stove. That was the first thing about her that made Boone almost smile. He fetched wood. She took off her gloves. Her hands were red and chapped, the nails cut short, one finger wrapped in thread where the skin had split. She moved with weariness but no wasted motion. Fire, water, flour, salt, a bit of lard from the crock. She found the rhythm of the kitchen in minutes, as if the room had been waiting for a woman who knew how to listen to hunger without making it ashamed. Ruth stood near the table, watching every movement. Marion caught her eye. Wash the cups, please. They're clean, Ruth said. Then wash the journey off our hands into them. Ruth understood. She took the basin. Caleb hovered by the ham Boone brought in and tried not to stare. Boone cut a slice, then another, then stopped measuring and cut enough. Ezra watched the knife. Nettie sat under the table with her doll, one hand on Marion's skirt hem. Samuel lay on the settle, flushed and whimpering. When coffee began to boil, Boone took down 7 tin cups, paused, and then brought a chipped enamel mug from the shelf. It was old, with blue flowers worn almost away. That one leaks a little, he said. I'll use it, Marion answered. He wanted to say it had belonged to his mother. He did not. They ate at dusk with the windows open and the prairie wind calming through the house. The children did not fall on the food. That would have hurt less. They waited for Marion's nod, then took small bites as though afraid the meal would vanish if they trusted it. Caleb tucked a corner of biscuit into his shirt. Ruth saw Boone see it and went red. Boone reached for the plate and put another biscuit on Caleb's side. No need to save the first one from the second. Caleb's chin trembled. For Samuel, Marion closed her eyes. Boone put 2 biscuits on a saucer and set them by the settle. Then Samuel's got his own. Nettie crept from beneath the table, took 1 bean from Marion's plate, and fed it to the faceless doll before putting one in her own mouth. Doll hungry too? Boone asked. Nettie froze. Marion's voice was quiet. Her name is Pearl. Boone nodded solemnly at the rag bundle. Pearl can sit at the table tomorrow if she keeps her elbows down. A tiny sound came from Nettie, not a laugh, not yet, but near enough to warn the room. After supper, awkwardness returned with the dirty dishes. It stood among them like another guest. Boone had built a bedroom downstairs, a smaller room across the hall, and a loft under the roof where he had stacked extra boards and nails. He had imagined foolishly and privately a wife's trunk at the foot of the big bed, a cradle one day in the corner, curtains at the windows. He had not imagined deciding where to put 5 children and a woman he had promised to marry on paper but did not yet trust in flesh. Marion washed dishes with Ruth drying beside her. Ezra carried water without being asked. Caleb fell asleep sitting upright, his head dipping over his plate. Nettie curled under the table again. Samuel's fever climbed. Boone watched Marion press a wet cloth to the toddler's forehead. Her face had gone hollow with worry. There's a doctor in town, Boone said. I have 62 cents. I didn't ask. She looked at him. I will owe you enough by morning. You'll owe me nothing for a doctor. That is not how the world works. It is how my wagon works. He went, though it was dark, and brought Dr. Merrick back under a moon, thin as a shaving of bone. The doctor was a small man with tired eyes and a bag that smelled of camphor. He listened to Samuel's chest, left powders, gave instructions, and looked too long at the children sleeping in chairs and corners. Outside by the porch steps, he said to Boone, "That woman has been run hard, as so have the children. Question is by whom?" Boone glanced through the window. Marian sat beside Samuel with the lamp painting, her face gold and worn. Question can wait. Can your reputation? Boone's mouth tightened. My reputation ever fed a fevered child. Dr. Merrick sighed. No, but gossip feeds on women quicker than coyotes on scraps. If she stays and there's no marriage, they'll make a meal of her. If you marry her, they'll say she trapped you. Either way, she pays first. Boone looked at the house. The brass key in his pocket felt heavy. I sent for a bride, he said. You sent for one woman. That there is a family. Boone did not answer. That night he gave Marian the downstairs bedroom with Samuel and Nettie. Ruth slept on a pallet at their feet. Caleb slept on a quilt in the kitchen near the stove. Ezra refused the loft until Boone climbed first and showed him there was no trick to it. Boone slept in the barn on a horse blanket, listening to his animals shift and stamp, smelling hay and leather and his own uncertainty. Near dawn, he woke to find Ezra sitting on an overturned bucket by the barn door, with a butcher knife across his knees. Boone sat up slowly. Morning. Ezra's eyes were red. I wasn't sleeping. I gathered. If you send us off, send us all together. Boone rubbed a hand over his face. That what you came to tell me with my own knife? I didn't steal it. I borrowed it. For what? Ezra stared out toward the pale line of morning. For remembering I ain't helpless. Boone saw then what the boy was. Not insolent, not dangerous. Just a child who had learned too early that a small blade could stand between hunger and something worse. My father had a rule, Boone said. No knives out unless there's work for them. Ezra's grip tightened. Mine had a rule too. Don't cry where men can see. Sounds like a poor rule. The boy looked at him sharply. Boone stood and held out his hand. There's kindling needs cutting. You want to keep that knife. It earns breakfast. Ezra stared for a long breath, then set the handle in Boone's palm. I know how to split kindling. Then show me. The day began there, not in tenderness, but in work. Boone milked. Ezra split kindling too thick at first, then learned to angle the blade. Marian came out at sunrise with her hair braided down her back and Samuel wrapped against her shoulder. Fever eased, but not gone. She found Ruth scattering feed to the hens and Caleb standing by the pump, wet to the elbows, grinning because water came up cold and clean as a miracle. I can make bread if you have yeast, Marian said. I have starter. You keep starter. My mother did. I tried not to kill it. She looked at him with something almost like surprise. Then we will feed it. Those words stayed with Boone all morning. They married 3 days later because the doctor was right and the town was waiting. Reverend Sutter came out in his black coat, sweating in the late heat. Marian wore the brown dress brushed as clean as Ruth could manage. Boone wore the same suit he had bought for meeting her, with one cuff still creased from where Samuel had clutched it during fever. The children stood in a row on the porch. Ezra looked ready to object if the vows sounded like a trap. Ruth held Nettie's hand. Caleb had jam on his chin, because Marian said a child should not go to a wedding hungry. Samuel slept in a basket lined with Boone's best quilt. The vows were plain. Boone said, I dough like a man signing for freight. He did not yet know how to carry. Marian said it like a woman stepping onto ice, because behind her were children who could not swim. After the Reverend left, Boone moved his trunk into the loft and gave Marian the downstairs room. He did it while she was washing the wedding cups, so there would be no discussion. When she saw the trunk gone, She stood in the bedroom doorway a long moment. The bed was made. Her little valise sat on the chair. Nettie's doll lay on the pillow as if Pearl had already claimed a place. Boone came in carrying an armload of boards for the loft. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did. I am your wife." He set the boards down. "You are a woman who arrived with 5 children, a fever, and no sleep. A preacher's words don't make strangers less strange by nightfall." Her eyes lowered. He heard how it sounded and gentled his voice. "Well, make rules that don't shame either of us." "What rules?" "You have that room. I knock. You run the kitchen as you see fit. I run the stock and fields. Children help according to age, not fear. We go to church enough to quiet tongues, but not enough to make a show. Money is spoken of plainly. No secrets that can harm the house." Her face changed at the last line. Boone noticed but did not press. "And the marriage?" she asked. He looked at the bed, then at the window where the prairie stretched empty and gold. "We keep the promise in public. In private, we earn what it means." Marion nodded once. "That is fair." It was fair. It was also lonely. Days took shape. The house learned noise. Not easy noise, not at first, but the small sounds of survival. The scrape of chairs, Ruth's broom under the table, Caleb coughing flour after plunging both hands into the bin, Ezra's assa biting unevenly into logs, Nettie whispering to Pearl behind the stove, Samuel spoon-banging a cup when he wanted milk. Marion worked as if rest were a debt collector she meant to outrun. She scrubbed the pantry shelves, boiled rags, aired mattresses, mended sheets, cleaned the stove until the iron shone black as a crow wing. She turned Boone's empty garden plot into straight rows with stakes and twine. She found wild plum along the draw and made preserves in a kettle. Standing over the steam with her sleeves rolled and her face flushed, she patched Boone's torn work shirt so neatly, he spent a foolish minute looking at the stitches by lamplight. At the table she measured food with care but not meanness. Everyone ate. That was her first law. She gave Boone the largest portion until he began trading half his meat on to whichever child looked thinnest. Marion caught him doing it, and the next evening she cut the portions even before the plate reached him. "I work harder than Caleb," Boone said. "Caleb is growing." Caleb sat straighter, proud and embarrassed. Boone accepted the smaller piece and ate it without complaint. After that, Caleb began leaving the best potato for Samuel instead of hiding bread. Ruth kept count of everything: cups on shelves, eggs from hens, beans in jars, biscuits on plates. She would stand in the pantry doorway, lips moving silently. One afternoon Boone found 3 biscuits wrapped in cloth under her pallet. He brought them to Marion. She looked tired. "I know, you know. I put 4 there yesterday. She ate 1 in the night. Should we tell her she needn't? She knows what we say. Her belly remembers different." That evening Marion set a small covered tin on the kitchen shelf within Ruth's reach. "For anyone hungry after dark," she said, not looking at the girl. "No asking needed." Ruth stared at the tin. Her cheeks flushed. She did not cry. But later Boone saw her put 1 biscuit back into it, as if trust could begin with returning what fear had taken. Nettie spoke first to the cow. Boone had a gentle brindle milk cow named Mercy, and Nettie followed Marion to the barn each morning with Pearl under her arm. On the 7th day, as Boone forked hay into the manger, he heard the smallest voice say, "She has kind eyes." He looked over. Nettie froze. Boone kept forking hay. "Mercy's proud of them." Nettie hid her face in the doll. That night at supper she whispered, "Pearl likes beans now." Everyone heard. No one made a fuss. Marion's hand paused over the bread knife, trembling just once. Samuel recovered slowly. He clung to Marion at first, then to Ruth, then one morning toddled across the kitchen and wrapped both arms around Boone's boot while Boone was trying to leave for the field. "Horse?" Samuel demanded. Boone looked down. "I am not a horse. Horse. Marion turned away to hide a smile. Boone crouched stiffly and offered 2 fingers. You might walk to the porch with me. Samuel took the fingers and leaned his whole small weight into them. Boone walked slower than he had ever walked in his life. The house changed. A quilt appeared over the settle. Curtains made from bleached flour sacks softened the kitchen windows. The rag rug was beaten clean and laid straight. A row of children's pegs lined the back door, coats hanging like proof. Ezra repaired the gate latch without being told, using wire Boone had nearly thrown away. Ruth planted marigold seeds along the porch because Marion said flowers warned sorrow not to get too comfortable. Caleb carried eggs in his cap and broke only 2. Nettie drew 2 black dots on Pearl's face with stove soot, then asked Boone if a doll could be pretty with uneven eyes. Most living things are uneven, he said. She considered that. Are you likely? She touched the scar near his jaw, a pale line half hidden in beard. Boone went still. Nettie, Marion said softly. It's all right, Boone managed. How did it break? Nettie asked. My face, she nodded. A horse kicked a fence rail loose. Rail kicked me. Did you cry? Boone looked at Marion. She was watching him with quiet attention. Not where men could see, he said. Ezra, from the doorway, heard and looked down. The old wounds came out in small pieces, as prairie bones after rain. Boone had built the house the year before, for a woman named Clara Bell, who never reached Nebraska. Diphtheria took her in Iowa 2 weeks before the wedding. He had not loved her deep, not yet, but he had loved the idea of not being alone. Worse than grief was the shame of standing in a finished house with no one coming. Folks had pitied him until pity soured into jokes. Boone kept the house polished and empty because he did not know how to admit he had built a dream and been left with lumber. Marion learned this not from a confession, but from a cedar box she found while looking for winter blankets. Inside were 2 letters tied with string, a pressed blue ribbon, and a tiny pair of knitted booties yellowed from age. She shut the box at once. Boone stood in the doorway. I wasn't prying, she said. I know. I was looking for quilts. I know. The room was dim. Rain tapped at the roof, the first cold rain of September. Children murmured below. The smell of bread rose through the floorboards. Boone crossed the loft and took the box, not angrily. He opened it and looked down. My mother knitted those before Clara came, he said. She died thinking she'd have grandchildren under this roof. Marion's voice was gentle. And then Clara died. And then I learned a house can laugh at a man. Marion did not offer comfort too quickly. That was one of her gifts. She sat on the trunk across from him and folded her hands. I had a red shawl once, she said. My sister Annabelle gave it to me when I turned 19. Said every woman should own one thing too bright for hard times. I sold it in Cheyenne for train fare and 2 loaves of bread. Nettie cried because she liked to sleep with a fringe in her hand. Boone looked up. Marion gave a small, tired smile. I still feel for it sometimes. Foolish, isn't it? No. Rain moved over the roof like fingers searching. What happened to your wrist? He asked. She looked at the fading bruise, now nearly gone. A man at the boarding house thought 5 children made me willing to bargain more than sewing. Boone's jaw hardened. I handled it, she said. I don't doubt that. I hit him with a flat iron. Despite himself, Boone let out one rough laugh. Marion's smile deepened for half a breath, then faded. I did not tell you about all 5 children because I thought you would say no, she said. I was tired of doors closing before I reached them. I might have said no. I'm ashamed of that. Her eyes lifted to his. So am I. The honesty did not wound like he expected. It settled between them, clean and difficult. Below, Samuel began to cry. Marion stood, but Boone was already moving. He stopped at the ladder, awkward. I can fetch him, he said. He wakes frightened, I know. That night, Boone carried Samuel through the kitchen, while the rain drummed and the stove held a low red glow. Marion watched from the bedroom doorway as Samuel's cheek settled against Boone's shoulder. Boone did not sing. He did not know songs. He only walked the floor, slow board by slow board, until the child's sobs softened into hiccups. When he passed Marion, he said, "He's lighter than a feed sack. He should not be." No, it was less than a promise, but more than talk. Outside pressure came in the shape of a store ledger. October brought wind, dust, and credit due. Boone had done business with Harlan Pike at the Mercantile for years, never loving the man but needing nails, coffee, lamp oil, salt, sugar, and seed. Pike was long-necked and smooth-handed, with a mustache he combed whenever he meant to be cruel politely. His wife ran the church charity basket, as though every donation bought her a better seat in heaven. Marion went to town with Boone on a Thursday, wearing her brown dress turned at the cuffs, Ruth beside her with a basket of eggs, Caleb holding Samuel's hand, and Nettie tucked under Boone's shadow, because wagons made her nervous. Ezra stayed at the ranch to mend fence, trusted with a task and proud enough to hide it. Inside the Mercantile, the air smelled of coffee beans, molasses, leather, and judgment. Mrs. Pike looked over the children. My, they multiply when fed, do they? Ruth's fingers tightened around the egg basket. Marion's expression did not change. Children often grow when not starved. Boone looked at her with a quick, surprised respect. Harlan Pike came from behind the counter. "Vale, your account's thicker than usual. After the cattle sale. You said that last month before acquiring dependence." The word struck. Dependence, like sacks loaded onto a wagon. Caleb leaned against Marion's skirt. Samuel reached for a peppermint stick in a jar, then pulled his hand back before touching it. Boone took out his list. Flour, coffee, caramel powder. If Dr. Merrick left any here. "For the orphan lot?" Mrs. Pike asked. Marion's face went pale. Boone laid both hands on the counter. "Say that again in front of me." Harlan's smile thinned. "No offense meant, but town has concerns. A woman arrives with 5 children, marries the first man with a roof, and now runs credit in his name. Folks notice. Folks should buy themselves better hobbies. You always were proud, Boone. Pride won't pay notes." At the word notes, Marion turned toward him. Boone's shoulders stiffened. Harlan opened a ledger and tapped a line. "House lumber, stove freight, windmill repair, breeding bull. You're carrying more debt than that white porch suggests. Add 6 hungry strangers and 1 hard winter, and the bank might take an interest." Marion looked at Boone, and Boone hated Harlan Pike more in that moment than he had hated any man living. "You did not tell me," she said quietly. He could have answered there. He could have told her the debt was his, not hers. He could have said he planned to manage it. Instead, his pride took the reins. "It wasn't your concern." The silence afterward was worse than shouting. Ruth set the egg basket on the counter with careful dignity. "We brought these to sell." Mrs. Pike lifted the cloth, inspected the eggs, and wrinkled her nose. "2 are small." Ruth went red to the ears. Marion took the basket back. "Then your cakes will be poorer for missing them." She turned toward the door. Boone followed with the children, leaving the list unfilled. Outside, cold wind cut down the street. Marion walked to the wagon, placed Samuel on the seat, settled Nettie beside him, then turned to Boone. "Debt can harm a house," she said. "You said no secrets that can harm the house. I built that house before you came, and I am cleaning it, feeding it, raising children in it, and wearing your name in a town that was ready to spit before I stepped off the train. Do not tell me what is and is not my concern." Her voice did not rise. That made it harder. Boone had no answer. They rode home with the flour sack empty and the air between them colder than the weather. That night's supper was cornmeal mush, thin milk, and apple preserves. Marion made it taste better than it had any right to. Boone ate what was put before him. Caleb did not complain, but he scraped the bowl long after it was empty. Ruth put half her portion into Samuel's cup when she thought no one saw. Ezra came in from the fence with a split knuckle and took one look at the table. "We short?" he asked. Marian set a bowl before him. "We are careful." He looked at Boone, then Marian, then sat. After dishes, Boone went to the barn instead of the loft. He worked by lantern, mending a harness that did not need mending. Near midnight he heard the barn door. Marian stood there wrapped in a shawl that was not red but brown and plain. Wind lifted loose strands of her hair. "You'll catch cold," he said. "Ah, will you?" She came inside and shut the door. For a while they listened to Mercy chewing hay. "I can take in sewing from town," Marian said. "I can sell preserves. Ruth can help gather eggs. Ezra can hire out after chores if the work is honest. We can plant winter onions near the south wall. I found seed in my trunk. You shouldn't have to pay my debts." "I am not speaking of your debts. I am speaking of our supper." The lantern hissed softly. Boone leaned his hands on the workbench. "I was going to tell you when I had it handled. That is what lonely men say when they don't know how to be helped." He looked at her sharply. She did not step back. "My sister's husband said it," Marian continued. "He hid debts, fever, a bad crop, a broken wagon axle, and then he hid himself in a bottle until there was nothing left to hide behind. I do not fear poverty, Boone. I fear being left outside the truth until it is too late to work." Boone's anger drained, leaving only shame. "My father lost land when I was 15, he said. Not all, enough. Men came and marked our things. My mother stood in the yard with her apron on, watching strangers carry out chairs she had scrubbed for 20 years. I swore I would never let a woman look at me that way. And so you let me look foolish in Pike's store instead?" The words landed clean. Boone nodded once. Yes, it was the first time he had given her the whole of a fault without trimming it. Marian's face softened, not in forgiveness yet, but in recognition. She stepped to the workbench and picked up the harness strap. "Your stitch is crooked." He blinked. "That's what you came to say?" "I came to say if we are going to be poor, we cannot afford crooked stitches." He stared at her, then gave a short laugh from somewhere deep and rusty. She took the awl, sat on the stool, and showed him how her father had mended harness before drink took his hands. Her fingers were sure. Boone watched the lamplight shine on the split in her knuckle. He wanted to cover it with his tome. He did not. When she finished, she handed the strap back. "There," she said. "That will hold." He looked at the neat line of stitches. "Will we?" She met his eyes. "That depends on whether you keep hiding weight until the roof cracks." He nodded. "I'll show you the ledger tomorrow." Tonight, so he did. They sat at the kitchen table while the children slept. Coffee, gone bitter, in the pot. Lamp low, numbers between them. Marian read each line. She did not gasp. She did not scold. She took a pencil and began making columns on brown wrapping paper. "You need cash before snow," she said. "Not promises after cattle sale. What can be sold without hurting spring? 2 steers. My bay, the spare plow. Do not sell tools unless you want to buy hunger later. The steers, yes. I can mix up if we get lye. Preserves can sell if Pike's wife does not poison the market with her tongue. She will. Then we sell after church to women who like jam more than they fear her." Boone looked at her across the table. Her hair was coming loose, her sleeves rolled, her eyes sharp with figures. She looked less like a desperate bride than a general planning winter. "You should have been a banker," he said. "No. I dislike taking houses from women in aprons." Something quiet moved in him then. Not romance as young folks imagine it, all roses and fiddle tunes. This was steadier and more dangerous. Respect taking root. Winter announced itself early with a storm out of the north. The sky went green-gray at noon, and by evening snow struck the windows hard enough to rattle them. Boone and Ezra brought the animals in close. Marian filled every kettle, baked 2 loaves, and set beans to soak, because storms made children remember hunger. Ruth laid quilts by the stove. Caleb carried wood until he fell asleep on the pile. Nettie lined Pearl and 2 cornhusk dolls along the hearth. They won't be scared. Samuel developed a cough. The wind screamed all night. Near dawn, Boone heard a crack like a rifle shot. He rose from the loft and found snow blowing through the kitchen. A branch from the young elm had broken loose and smashed the small pantry window. Flour dusted the floor like more snow. Marian was already there in her nightdress and shawl, holding a quilt against the broken pane, while Ruth gathered jars with bare feet on the freezing boards. "Get back," Boone said. "There's glass," Marian answered. "Samuel is coughing." He took the quilt from her. Their hands met in the cold. Hers were ice. "Boots," he said. "You first." It was a foolish little argument. It warmed him anyway. They boarded the window with a crate lid, while Ezra held the lantern, and Caleb cried because the flour barrel had taken snow. Marian knelt, scooped the top layer away, and saved what she could. When Caleb kept crying, she put flour on his nose and said, "Now you look like a miller." "A miller is too important to cry over spilled weather," he hiccuped. "Can millers eat pancakes? If they carry wood." He carried wood. By afternoon, Samuel's cough deepened. Dr. Merrick could not come through the storm. Marian made onion poultices, steam tents, and bitter tea. Boone held Samuel upright near the stove, while the toddler fought for breath. The little body seemed too small for such labor. Nettie crouched by Boone's boot with Pearl clutched tight. "Don, let him go to the county bed," she whispered. Boone's chest tightened. "He's not going anywhere. You promise?" Promises had become dangerous things in that house. Boone looked at Marian. Her eyes were red from smoke and fear. "I promise," he said. Samuel worsened at midnight. Marian's calm began to crack. She measured powder with shaking hands. Ruth stood beside her, pale and silent. Ezra hovered at the door, wearing Boone's coat and boots, ready to run for the doctor through snow that would blind a grown man. "I can go," Ezra said. "No," Marian and Boone said together. The boy's face twisted. "I ain't useless." Boone put Samuel into Marian's arms and crossed to Ezra. He set both hands on the boy's shoulders. "You are useful here. Keep the fire alive? That is not little work." Ezra's mouth trembled. "What if he dies warm?" The words hollowed the room. Boone had no answer fit for a child. He only pulled Ezra against him, stiff at first, then hard, and the boy stood rigid before sagging into the hold. "He won't die alone," Boone said. It was the truth he could offer. Samuel lived. By morning his breathing eased. Marian sat in the rocker Boone had built, the child asleep against her, her head tipped back, exhausted beyond even worry. Boone covered her with a quilt from his mother's trunk. She woke just enough to catch his hand. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" "For not sending him away inside your heart." Boone did not move. Her fingers lay over his, light and warm. "I don't know when that stopped being possible," he said. Her eyes opened. They looked at each other in the dim blue morning, with dirty dishes stacked by the sink, snow against the boarded window, children asleep on the floor, and the stove breathing heat like an animal that had chosen to stay. She let go first, but slowly. After the storm, the town came to them in pieces. Some came with kindness. Mrs. Abel from the next farm brought potatoes and said nothing about charity. Reverend Sutter brought a sack of oats and stayed to help patch the window. Others came with eyes that counted beds and cups and found sin wherever they wanted. Mrs. Pike came with 2 churchwomen under the banner of concern. Marian received them in the kitchen with bread cooling on the table and Samuel asleep in a basket near the stove. Boone was outside splitting wood. He heard voices through the door and paused. "We only worry for the children," Mrs. Pike said. 5 is a great burden for a woman with no blood claim to 2 of them." "They are mine by promise," Marian replied. "And Mr. Val's?" The room cooled. Ruth was at the sink, hands in dishwater. Nettie sat under the table with Pearl. Caleb, who had been building a fort from kindling, went still. Marian said, "You might ask Mr. Vale what is his." Mrs. Pike lowered her voice, in a way meant to carry. "The county has arrangements, proper arrangements. Children belong where their keep can be guaranteed. A ranch under debt is not a guarantee." Boone stepped in then, snow on his shoulders, assay still in hand. The churchwomen startled. Mrs. Pike pressed a hand to her throat. Mr. Vale. Boone set the assay by the door. "You looking to buy bread or trouble?" "I am looking after Christian duty. Fen start by not frightening children in my kitchen." Mrs. Pike's face tightened. "Your kitchen?" Boone crossed to the table. Nettie crawled from underneath and stood behind his leg. Caleb's small hand found his coat. Ruth did not turn from the sink, but her shoulders shook. Boone looked at Marian. She stood straight, but he saw what the words had done. County arrangements, proper beds, names split like kindling. "My kitchen," Boone said. "My wife, my children, my debt, my concern." Marian's lips parted. Mrs. Pike recovered enough to smile. "All five?" Boone glanced down at Nettie, whose fingers were hooked in his trousers seam. "Can you count higher?" The younger churchwoman coughed into her glove. The older one looked away, hiding what might have been a smile. Mrs. Pike left with no bread and less victory than she came for. Afterward, Marian went to the pantry and stood with her back to the room. Boone followed but did not touch her. "You should not say what you do not mean just to silence a cruel woman," she said. "I don't. They are not yours by law. I'll fix that." She turned then. "Boone, what?" Her eyes shone. "Do not offer from anger." He looked toward the kitchen. Caleb was whispering to Ruth, and Ruth was wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand as if annoyed they had dared wet themselves. Nettie had climbed onto Boone's chair and placed Pearl on his plate. Samuel slept with one fist open on the quilt. Ezra, coming from the barn, stopped in the doorway and looked from face to face. Boone's voice was rough. "I'm tired of folks acting like home is a blood test." Marian pressed a hand to her mouth. That night she placed the chipped enamel mug with blue flowers beside Boone's plate instead of her own. He noticed. "It leaks," he said. "I know. Why give it to me? You said your mother used it. My mother complained about it. Then, it belongs with someone who does the same." He laughed under his breath and drank from it. Coffee dripped onto his sleeve. Caleb laughed first, then Nettie, then even Ezra. Marian smiled into her cup. For a while, it seemed they might endure. But winter has a way of finding the crack. In late November, a letter arrived from a man named Silas Venn, brother to Nettie and Samuel's dead father. Boone recognized the name from Marian's careful explanations. Venn had refused the children after their father died, claiming no space and less money. Now, hearing Marian had married a landowner, he wrote with sudden interest. The letter said the younger two belonged to his bloodline, and that he would come claim them unless compensated for relinquishing his right. Compensated, as if children were calves at auction. Marian read the letter at the table. Her face went still, in a way Boone had learned to fear. "He cannot take them," Ruth said. "Can he?" Ezra grabbed his cap. "I'll hide them in the high loft." Caleb began crying, angry tears. "Nettie bites. Tell him she bites." Nettie said nothing. She lifted Samuel's hand and pressed it to Pearl's face. Boone took the letter and read it twice. "He wants money." "We do not have money," Marian said. "We have cattle. We have debt. We have a shotgun." "Boone." He laid the letter down. "I won't let him take them. You might not be able to stop him." That night Marian packed. She did it silently, after the children slept, folding clothes by lamplight in the downstairs bedroom. Boone found her placing Samuel's little shirt into the old valise. The room smelled of lavender soap and cold fear. "What are you doing? Leaving before he comes?" The floor seemed to tilt. "With all of them." "Yes." "Where?" I don't know." That's not an answer. It is the only one I have. Boone stepped into the room. You plan to be gone by morning? I plan to spare you. Spare me what? Losing the house you built, losing land to fight for children the law might say are not yours, losing your standing over a woman who arrived with trouble sewn into her hem. His anger rose, but beneath it was terror. You don't get to decide alone what I can bear. Her hands shook as she closed the valleys. I have decided alone for years. That was before what? Before he knew the sound of Samuel breathing in sleep, before Ruth stopped hiding biscuits, before Ezra's knife became a tool, before Caleb asked if spring grass tasted sweet to cows, before Nettie gave Pearl a face and told Boone Mercy had kind eyes, before coffee appeared warm beside his plate even when he came in late, before Marion's hand had rested in his through the blue hour after fever. Before the house stopped being empty. Boone could not say all of that. It was too much and not enough. He crossed the room and set his palm flat on the valise lid. Don't take my home away. Marion went utterly still. The sentence was not grand. It had no polish, but it opened him down the center. Her eyes filled. Boone, I built the house. You made it answer when I walk in. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she turned her face as if ashamed of it. He did not reach for her, though every part of him wanted to. Silas Venn comes, she whispered, and he will use the law, gossip, hunger, anything he can. Men like that know where a woman is tired. Then he can start with me fresh. She gave a broken laugh. You think strength scares greed? No, but paper does sometimes. What paper? I ride to town tomorrow. Speak with Judge Hanley. File guardianship for all 5 if he'll allow it. Adoption after if the law takes time. Adoption? She stared at him. All 5? I already told Mrs. Pike I could count. She sank onto the bed, the valise still between them. Why would you do that? Boone looked around the room. Pearl on the pillow. Ruth's extra stockings folded near the stove brick warming pan. Samuel's cup on the chair. Marion's mending basket with one of his socks turned inside out. Because I don't want a quiet house. The next day, Boone rode through bitter wind to town. Marion sent Ezra with him, because Ezra insisted, and because Boone said a boy fighting to belong ought to see the courthouse where men wrote such things down. Judge Hanley was old, half-deaf, and fond of peppermint. He listened to Boone read Silas Venn's letter, asked Ezra if he wished to remain at the Vale place, and received such a fierce answer that he leaned back blinking. I am leaving my little ones, Ezra said, and I ain't leaving Mrs. Vale neither. The judge looked at Boone. And Mr. Vale? Ezra's jaw worked. I ain't decided if he needs watching. Boone coughed into his fist. Judge Hanley chuckled. Honest boy, paper was filed. Fees were paid with money Boone had meant for winter's salt and a new plowshare. On the way home, he stopped at Pike's store to purchase flour on credit. Harlan Pike refused. Until your account is settled, cash only. Ezra stood beside Boone, fists clenched. Boone looked at Pike a long moment. Then price my cattle fair when I bring them. Pike smiled. Market's down. Funny how it falls when a man is cornered. Business. Boone took Ezra by the shoulder and turned him toward the door. Outside, Ezra spat into the dust. I could have knocked over his pickle barrel. I know. Why didn't you? Because pickles won't pay court fees. Ezra looked at him sidelong. You paid fees? Paper costs? For us? Boone tightened the cinch on his horse. For the house. Ezra said nothing the whole ride home. But that night, when Boone climbed to the loft, he found the butcher knife laid on his trunk, cleaned and wrapped in cloth. Beside it sat a note in Ruth's careful hand, because Ezra's writing was poor. For work only, Boone sat on the edge of his cot and held the note until the lamp burned low. Silas Venn arrived 3 days before Christmas in a black coat too thin for Nebraska and boots polished by someone else's labor. He came in a hired buggy, with Harlan Pike beside him as if greed needed a witness. Snow lay in patches across the yard. The sky was iron. Marion stood on the porch with all 5 children behind her. Boone came from the barn, carrying a feed sack, and set it down slowly. Silas Venn stepped out, smiling. His eyes went to the house, the barn, the windmill, then the children. "Nettie," he said warmly. "Samuel, come say hello to your Uncle Silas." Nettie hid behind Ruth. Samuel clung to Marion's skirt and said, "No." Venn's smile faltered. Poor things, turned against their own blood. Boone walked to the porch steps. "State your business." "My business is family." "Funny, family didn't feed them." Venn's eyes cooled. "You are Boone Vale. I hear you took in Mrs. Colton." "Mrs. Vale, so the preacher says." Venn's gaze touched Marion in a way Boone disliked. "A woman in trouble will say vows quick." Marion stepped forward before Boone could speak. "A man without decency will speak of vows he does not understand." Venn laughed softly. "Still sharp, Marion? Your sister said you had too much pride for your circumstances." "My sister loved her children, my brother's children," he corrected. "And 2 of them are mine to claim," Ruth whispered. "No." Boone heard it as if it were shouted. Harlan Pike opened a folder. "Mr. Venn has consulted with me regarding local matters. Your guardianship filing is incomplete until hearing. The court might consider blood relation, financial stability, moral standing." "Moral standing," Boone said. Pike's mouth curved. "A crowded house, a hurried marriage, debt, questions." Marion's face went white, but she did not bow her head. Venn looked at Boone. "I am reasonable. Pay me $100 for the inconvenience of signing away claim, and I go. Refuse, and I take what blood and law permit. $100. It might as well have been the moon." Boone felt the old fear rise. Men carrying chairs from his mother's yard, his father's silence, his own vow never to be brought low in front of a woman. Then he heard Caleb breathing hard through his nose, trying not to cry. He heard Nettie whispering Pearl's name like a prayer. He saw Samuel's fingers tangled in Marion's skirt. He saw Ezra standing at the far end of the porch with empty hands, choosing not to reach for a weapon because Boone had taught him tools belong to work. Boone took the brass key from his pocket. It still had the blue ribbon on it, faded now from years of handling. "I built this house before sending for a bride," he said. Venn rolled his eyes. "Touching," Boone went on, voice steady. "I thought a home was something a man finished, then invited people into. I was wrong. House was lumber. Home came hungry. Home came fevered. Home came with a crate, a rag doll, a boy too brave for his years, a girl counting bread, another boy asking if horses ate better than children, a little one who spoke first to a cow, and a baby who learned to sleep against my shoulder." Marion covered her mouth. Boone looked at Pike. "You want debt settled? Bring your ledger." Pike narrowed his eyes. "With what money?" Boone turned toward the pasture where his best breeding bull stood dark against the snow. The animal was the pride of his place, the future of his herd, the thing he had bought on credit and boasted of to no one. Selling him would set the ranch back years. "With the bull," Boone said. Pike's brows lifted. Marion turned sharply. "Boone, no." He looked at her then. "You told me not to sell tools unless I wanted to buy hunger later. That bull ain't a tool. He's pride with horns. He is spring money. You and the children are winter survival." Venn's smile returned. "Sell what you like. My 100 remains." Boone faced him. "You'll get $20 and sign before Judge Hanley. Or you'll face Dr. Merrick, Reverend Sutter, Mrs. Abel, and every neighbor willing to swear those children were starved before they came here and thriving after. You'll explain why blood waited until land entered the story. You'll explain your price, Ven's eyes flickered. Harlan Pike said, "Careful, Vale." "No," Marion said. Everyone turned. She stepped down one porch step, her shawl snapping in the wind. "No, Mr. Pike, you be careful. You have called my children orphans in your store, hinted me loose in front of flour barrels, and measured mercy by credit. If you stand with this man, stand fully. Say in court that you believe 2 toddlers should be taken from the only bed where they sleep unafraid, because their uncle found out a house has fresh whitewash." Pike's face darkened. "And I will stand too," she continued. "I will bring Ruth's hidden biscuits. I will bring Samuel's fever cloths. I will bring Nettie's doll and ask why a child gave it no face until she felt safe enough to imagine eyes. I will bring my husband's ledger, every debt, every payment, every sack of flour. Poverty is not neglect, redressed as concern is." The wind moved over the yard. From the road came another wagon, then another. Mrs. Abel climbed down with Reverend Sutter behind her. Dr. Merrick rode up on a bay horse, his scarf whipping. Judge Hanley himself sat in a buggy driven by his nephew, wrapped in blankets and looking irritated at the cold. Marion stared. Boone leaned toward her. "Ezra rode this morning." Ezra lifted his chin, proud and terrified. Judge Hanley thumped his cane on the buggy floor. "I dislike hearings in snow. Mr. Van, I dislike child bargaining more. We can conduct preliminary statements here or in my courtroom, where I will be warmer and less forgiving." Silas Van looked at the gathering faces. Reverend Sutter stern, Dr. Merrick grim, Mrs. Abel with her arms folded, Boone planted like a fence post, Marion blazing cold and bright on the steps. He chose money, as Boone had known he would. $20, a signed relinquishment of claim pending formal adoption. A statement witnessed. Harlan Pike, cornered by the judge's presence, valued the bull fairly enough to settle Boone's store account and leave a little cash besides. Boone watched the animal led away 2 days later and felt the cost like a tooth pulled deep. Caleb cried because he had named the bull General. Boone crouched beside him. "Sigh no? Will he be cold? He'll have a barn? Will he know we didn't sell him because he was bad?" Boone swallowed. I expect animals understand more than men." Caleb wiped his nose. "Can we miss him?" Yes. So they missed the bull openly. It became a strange kind of lesson in the house. Sacrifice was allowed to hurt. Marion made a good supper that night from beans, the last ham bone, and biscuits, browned perfect. No one spoke much. After dishes, Ruth set the covered tin on the shelf and put 2 biscuits inside. "For General," Caleb said sadly. "For anyone hungry after dark," Ruth corrected, but gently. Christmas came lean and warm. Marion made wreaths from cedar scraps and tied them with strips of old cloth. Boone carved Caleb a horse from pine, rough but recognizable. He made Nettie a tiny chair for Pearl. Ruth received a needle case Marion had sewn from blue fabric found in the cedar box. With Boone's permission, Samuel got a ball of yarn wrapped tight, which delighted him beyond reason. Ezra received the butcher knife back sharpened and fitted with a new handle Boone had carved. "For work?" Boone said. Ezra's eyes shone. "For work?" Marion gave Boone a handkerchief embroidered with his initials in threads so dark he nearly missed it. "It is not much." He touched the letters. "BV, small, careful, permanent." "It's the first thing I've owned with my name made by someone else's hand," he said. She looked down. His gift to her was wrapped in brown paper. She opened it slowly and went still. A red shawl lay in her lap, not new. Bought second-hand from Mrs. Abel's cousin. Mended at one corner, the fringe uneven, but red, deep winter red, bright as a coal. Marion touched it as if touching a ghost. Boone's voice was low. "Every woman should own one thing too bright for hard times." She pressed the shawl to her face. The children went quiet, sensing something holy without understanding why. Later, after they had eaten and sung one carol badly, Because no one knew all the words, Marian stepped onto the porch wearing the shawl. Snow reflected moonlight across the fields. The house behind them glowed in every window. Boone came out with 2 cups of coffee. One was the chipped enamel mug. He handed it to her. "It leaks," she said. "I know." They stood shoulder to shoulder. "The adoption will take time," Boone said. "Most worthwhile things do. I sold the bull. I noticed. I don't regret it, I know." He looked at her. The red shawl framed her face, and the moon showed the tired lines beside her mouth, the strength in her chin, the softness she guarded like the last match in a storm. "I'm not good at saying things," Boone said. "I noticed that too." A smile touched his mouth. From inside came Ruth's voice, telling Caleb to stop feeding Samuel crumbs in bed. Ezra laughed. Nettie murmured to Pearl. The sounds moved through the walls and onto the porch. Boone took a breath. "When I sent for you, I thought I needed a wife to fill a house. Then you came with 5 children and filled places I didn't know were empty." Marian's fingers tightened around the cup. He turned the brass key over in his palm. The blue ribbon was frayed almost to threads. "This was meant for you when you arrived. I was too stunned and too small-hearted to give it." She looked at the key, then at him. "I don't want rules between us because of fear," he said. "Only respect and time. And whatever kindness we can keep choosing when the weather turns." Her eyes glistened. "Are you asking me to stay?" "No." His voice roughened. "I'm asking you to stop thinking you're a guest." For a long moment, only the wind answered. Then Marian took the key. She did not throw herself into his arms. She did not make a speech. She simply slipped the blue ribbon over her finger and leaned her shoulder against his. Boone stood very still, as if a wild bird had landed near enough to trust him. In spring, the hearing was held in town with haw mud in the streets and meadowlarks singing along the fence posts. Silas Van did not return. Harlan Pike attended because men like him enjoy watching doors close, even when not on them. Mrs. Pike sat in the back pew of the courtroom wearing a hat with too many feathers. Judge Hanley asked the children questions one by one. Ezra said he wanted the Vale name if Boone didn't mind him still remembering his father. Boone answered before the judge could. "A name ain't a broom. It don't sweep the old one out." Ruth said she wanted to stay where the biscuit tin was never locked. Caleb asked if being adopted meant General the Bull was his brother. The courtroom laughed and he scowled until Boone said, "No, but we can still speak well of him." Nettie held Pearl up and whispered, "She says yes." Samuel, when asked where he lived, pointed at Boone and said, "Home." That settled more hearts than law could. The papers were signed. 5 children became Vale by ink, but they had been becoming so for months by firelight. Chores, fever, bread, and the stubborn return of trust. Outside the courthouse, Mrs. Pike approached Marian with a tight face. Boone stepped close, but Marian touched his sleeve. Mrs. Pike cleared her throat. "I might have spoken hastily." Marian waited, and unkindly Mrs. Pike added, as if the word cost money. "Yes," Marian said. Mrs. Pike's feathers trembled. "The church sewing circle could use preserves for the Easter social. If you have any to sell, I do. A fair price. At my price." Boone looked away to hide his smile. Mrs. Pike nodded once and left. Marian turned to Boone. "Do not grin like that. It encourages me. I hope to encourage you often." The words came easier now, though still shy at the edges. The garden showed green. Ezra and Boone built 2 more bunks in the loft, and Ezra carved his initials under the ladder where he thought no one would see. Ruth stopped counting biscuits every night, though she still liked to know how much flour sat in the barrel. Caleb learned to milk Mercy and sang to her in a voice that made the hens nervous. Nettie stitched a new dress for Pearl from scraps of Marian's red shawl fringe, and Samuel followed Boone through the yard with a stick over his shoulder. solemnly fixing fence posts. By hitting them, the house no longer looked too clean. Boots lined the door. The table bore knife marks, ink stains, and one dark ring from where Boone had set a hot coffee pot without thinking, and Marian had declared the mark proof of life. Curtains lifted in the wind. Marigolds came up uneven along the porch. A cradle Boone had once hidden in loft was brought down, not because there was a baby to put in it, but because Nettie wanted a bed for Pearl, and Marian said hidden grief should either be used or aired. One evening, after a long day planting corn, Boone came in late and found supper kept warm. Coffee waited by his plate under a saucer. Marian sat at the table mending Ezra's shirt. Her red shawl hung over the chair. The children were scattered in the kitchen and parlor, each doing some small task, badly or well. Ruth was reading from a primer. Caleb was asleep with his head on folded arms. Nettie was teaching Samuel to say adoption, which came out adoption, and made them both giggle. Boone washed at the basin and sat. Marian placed bread beside him. You forgot noon meal. Fence broke near the south draw. You say that as if fences break louder than stomachs. He accepted the scolding like grace. Ruth looked up from her primer. Mister, she stopped. A blush rose. Pa, can I read this line? The room stilled. Boone's hand froze over the bread. Ruth looked terrified that she had done wrong. Boone cleared his throat. I'm like that. She read slowly, stumbling over 2 words. Boone heard none of them clearly. Pa had struck something in him that kept ringing. Later, when the children were asleep and the dishes washed, he found Marian on the porch. Sunset lay over the prairie in long bands of rose and gold. The young elm, broken in the winter storm, had put out leaves from a lower branch. Crooked, alive, Boone stood beside Marian. Ruth called me Pa. I hurt. I didn't earn that word. Marian looked toward the fields. Children know what they are owed better than we think. They also know when someone starts paying. He let that settle. After a while, he said, Marian. She turned. He had faced dead men, storms, fever, courtrooms, and his own empty house. Still, this frightened him most. I love you, he said. No music swelled, no horse stamped at just the right time. The prairie did not pause. The words simply stood there between them, plain and work-worn. Marian's eyes filled slowly. Boone hurried, because silence scared him. You don't have to answer. I know we started backward. I know duty came before choice. I just needed you to know the choice caught up. She stepped closer. Her hand, chapped from wash water and mending, took his. I loved you, she said, when you put biscuits aside for Samuel and pretended it was nothing. I trusted you when you gave Ezra work instead of suspicion. I chose you when you told me not to take your home away. Boone bowed his head. Her hand came to his cheek, thumb resting near the old scar. I am answering now, she whispered. I love you too. He held her then, gently at first, then with the quiet strength of a man who had learned that holding was not the same as trapping. Inside, the stove ticked as it cooled. Caleb murmured in his sleep. Somewhere in the loft, Ezra turned over and muttered about fence wire. Ruth's primer lay open on the table. Nettie's Pearl sat in the cradle with her uneven soot eyes, watching over all of them. Years later, folks would still speak of the Vale place as if it had always been full. They would remember Marian's preserves at church socials, Boone's repaired fences, Ezra's straight back, Ruth's fine stitching, Caleb's way with animals, Nettie's quiet drawings, and Samuel racing barefoot across the yard, as if hunger had never known his name. But houses remembered the before. That White House on the Nebraska rise remembered the day a man stood with a brass key in his pocket, expecting one bride, and watched 5 hungry children step down from a train. It remembered that he could have called them burden, mistake, or trouble. Instead, slowly, awkwardly, and at a cost he came to bless, Boonvale learned to call them home.